Hello and welcome to today's Up to Thrive Manage Your Mind Mindful Moment.
Welcome to Up to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Corina Sims.
Today, I want to talk to you about worry. The usual garden variety worry that one statistic I found says somewhere around 60% of us engage in. I'm not talking about the kind of worry that feels uncontrollable, that is so excessive that it's interfering with your daily life, like your work, your relationships, or your overall well-being. If that's what's happening, then that could be part of an anxiety disorder, and that is definitely worth seeing your doctor about. The worry that we're talking about today is the kind of mindless worry that many of us indulge in without really questioning it. I mean, we could, but for some of us, it's just kind of part of how we think. It's not a clinical disorder, but it still doesn't feel very nice, and it can cloud your thinking and hold you back in life. You might overthink what might go wrong. You might delay making decisions because you're worried about not getting it right. You could imagine worst case scenarios. What if I fail? What if I look stupid? Now, I do know a thing or two about worry. Me and worry, we're old friends. We go way back. But over the years, I have learned to eventually clearly see worry for what it really is. Worry is an imposter. It is just emotional static deceiving you to believe it is essential. One of the biggest issues with worry is that it is really, really sneaky. It's a master at convincing you that it's necessary, that it's helpful. But here's the truth. Worry is not necessary. Instead, it's actually counterproductive. Now, I've had this conversation with other self-confessed worriers, and there are some, maybe you're one of them, who believes they have to worry to get things done or sort things out. But there's a big difference between problem solving and worrying. Some people really believe that worrying about things helps them solve problems or maybe helps motivate them to solve problems. And today, I really want to challenge that perspective. So first, I want to tell you about a fun little study I found that sums this all up pretty nicely. It was a paper I found in the Behavior Research and Therapy Journal, volume 135, published in 2020. The study's called Worry Impairs the Problem-Solving Process, Results from an Experimental Study by Sandra J. Lara and Michelle G. Newman. So in this study, they recruited 185 volunteers. They were college students from psychology courses in a public university. Now, the first thing that they did was they gave them all a questionnaire, which was designed to identify the worriers and the non-worriers. So people who just naturally worried a lot and people who didn't. Then before starting the experiment, they had what they called baseline state measures. So questionnaires that were designed to assess in the beginning where they were in terms of worry, anxiety, relaxation, and mood. So they wanted to know how they felt right now. Then they had everyone sit down and come up with a real life problem that they had some control over the solution. So it couldn't be something like, your mama's dying or something like that, right? It had to be something they did have some control over. And then they randomly broke the group into 3 groups, and each group was given a separate 2-minute task. So one group was told to worry about the problem for 2 minutes. It reminds me of one of my good friends who was having a conversation with her mom on the phone and finally just stopped and said, "Look, Mom, okay, what we're going to do now, we're going to worry as hard as we can about this problem and just see what happens." So what they did with this group, they gave an example that you're not performing well in one of your classes. That could be the example. So in that case, think about your concerns, such as, what if I fail the next exam? What would happen if I don't pass this class, etc. And then they wanted them to reflect on the implications, such as, what does this problem say about me as a student? What would my family think about this problem? And keep going, right? They really, really wanted to get into this worrying, right? And then they wanted them to reflect on any possible negative outcomes of this situation. They really wanted them to get into this worrying. And then this was all in an instruction in a little paragraph. And it says at the bottom of the paragraph, if you find your mind wandering at any time, try to refocus your attention back to worrying about the problem. I love it. And then with another group, they were asked to objectively consider the problem for 2 minutes. So their little paragraph of instruction was to break the problem down into smaller components and or come up with a positive goal that you have for this issue. And so they gave as an example, the problem is that you're not performing very well in one of your classes. And in this case, you could break the problem down into parts such as, I've not been attending the class as often as I should. I've not been taking enough detailed notes in class. I have a heavy course load, which takes time away from studying for this class, etc. And or they were instructed to come up with a goal, such as scoring at least a letter grade higher on your next exam. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, it said, if you find your mind wandering to any potential negative outcomes of this problem, try to refocus your attention back to just the problem itself. And then there was group number 3. They were instructed to just relax. Okay. So each of these groups, the task was set for 2 minutes long. So group 3 was asked to relax for 2 minutes. Their paragraph started with the sentence, you'll now be asked to engage in a period of relaxation. And then it talks about how some people can relax by focusing on their breathing. And then they go through a technique called diaphragmatic breathing and tell them that it involves expanding your stomach rather than your chest. And they give an example of what that looks like and how to do that breathing. And then after 2 minutes of either really worrying about the problem or breaking the problem down and forming goals or doing relaxation, the groups were then reassessed for worry, anxiety, relaxation, and mood to see if that had changed after they had completed that task. And then they had them all brainstorm solutions to their problem. Write down as many as they could. And then they had to pick what they thought would be the best solution. And then they had to identify how confident they were that this solution would work and how likely it was that they would actually do it. And then finally, again, they finished with another assessment of how they felt in terms of worry, anxiety, relaxation, and mood. And then they had independent assessors go over all the results, not knowing which people were worriers and which people were not worriers. And then they rated the effectiveness of the solution. So in other words, if it was avoiding the problem, which was not likely to help, versus doing something about the problem that would help, right? So they identified which solutions were potentially, to be effective. The findings were really interesting, though probably not entirely surprising. They found that the group who sat and worried, whether they were a worrier or they weren't a worrier, if they sat and worried for 2 minutes, they weren't able to come up with as effective solutions as those who spent the time being objective and those who just did the relaxation. Now, they all came up with about the same number of solutions, but the quality was what was different. Some of the suggestions were things like ignore it until later, get some sushi, do nothing. Okay, so not very effective solutions. And then worriers who did the objective task had more confidence in their solutions than the worriers who did the worry task. So it sounds to me that they could see that the solutions they generated when they sat and worried beforehand weren't going to be great solutions. But if they were more objective beforehand, they could identify that their solutions were pretty good. So they were more confident in their decisions if they were more objective beforehand. Now, overall, regardless if the solutions were okay or not, the worriers were just generally less confident in their solutions than non-worriers. So even if the solutions were, pretty good, they were less confident. And then in contrast, the non-worriers were confident in their solutions regardless if they did the worrying or the objective task. So regardless of whether the solutions were actually good or not. The group who did the objective task, whether they were a worrier or they weren't a worrier, they came up with more effective solutions than either the breathing or the worrying groups. Those who worried and those who just breathed both had similar, less effective solutions. So worrying didn't help at all. Only being objective helped. And remember, they were instructed if they had negative thoughts about the problem to come back and just focus on breaking the problem down and creating some goals, right? Now, as a group, again, whether they were a worrier or not a worrier, if they were assigned the worry task, when they then answered the question about their intention to implement their solution, their intention was low. So they had no intention of actually doing it, which is probably a good thing because it sounds like the solutions weren't great. Now, worriers and non-worriers who had the worry task also reported more worry and anxiety even after the solutions were identified, right? They'd done each part, and at the very end, they were still worried and anxious, right? So that just tells us that the effects really linger. They also had more doubt. And again, seems to me they probably could see that their solutions weren't great. So if we were to extrapolate any conclusions from that study, the take-home messages are that when we worry, instead of approaching a problem objectively, breaking it down and thinking about what we want, what our end goal is, when we worry about it, instead, we're much less likely to come up with solutions that actually fix the problem. And the solutions that we do come up with, we're probably not going to do anyway. Now, this is only looking at worry from a place of having a problem that we can fix. What about the worries that we have that something might happen? I could do the wrong thing at the gym and embarrass myself. So what happens? I just don't go. I could say the wrong thing when I see that person at the shop. So what happens? I just kind of look the other way and pretend I don't see them. I don't say anything. I don't ask the question because what if they say no, right? What if I can't keep up? Again, I'm just not going to try, right? This is where worry can really sabotage us. So here's another study that helps us see how this sneaky little worry's bark is much often worse than its bite. Now, this study had participants record their worries 4 times throughout the day. And then for 30 days, every night, they sat down, they looked at their list of worries, and they checked off how many actually came true. Now, how many worries do you think actually came true after that 30-day period? 9%. That means that 91% of the worries, so most of the worries, did not materialize. And of the 9% that did, about 1/3 of those had better outcomes than they even expected. And for 1 in 4 of the participants, exactly 0 worries actually materialized. So, friends, I'm hoping that you are taking a good hard look at what you're worrying about today and maybe pulling yourself back when you recognize that you are worrying. Instead, start thinking about how you can break the problem down and the solutions that you can come up with, what kind of goals you can set for yourself, looking at it from another light and seeing that worry indeed pretends to be necessary. Have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive and not worry. I hope you've enjoyed today's mindful moment. And before you go, if you're a midlife woman and you're in a place in your life where you're feeling like you'd like to make some changes, maybe prioritize your health and your well-being for a change, I'd like to invite you to come and check out my Midlife Reset program. It is where I prove to you that eating more and moving your body smarter can transform your body and your mindset in midlife. It's not a diet. There's no restriction, long, grueling cardio sessions, no complicated meal plans or crazy food rules. We don't cut out any food groups. There aren't any strict food protocols or expensive supplements. We help you organize your very own individualized fitness and nutrition program to help you reach the goals that you would like to reach. Just a different approach that can set you up for health and well-being for the rest of your life. So if you're interested, please check out the show notes. There'll be a link there to click through to the Midlife Reset program. I would love to meet you inside the program. Have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive.
The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts her medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.